All right, here we go again with part 5 of chapter 5, looking at classical India now. And we're going to today focus on religions of India. The first religion that we're going to talk about is called Jainism. And Jainism is an offshoot, it's an offspring, it is a extension of the Hindu religion. So, under Hinduism, there is a belief that everything on earth, every living creature on earth, has a divine soul within it. And that divine soul is a small, tiny fraction of the universal soul that they call Brahma. And the Jainists take that idea and say, you know what? If every human being and every living creature is part divine, because we all have a soul, then it would be wrong to do any violence or harm to any living creature. So about 2400 years ago, a small group of people started saying we got to change the way we live. And the idea that they follow is called ahimsa, which is no violence, no matter what. And it is the fundamental belief of this new religion called Jainism. So everything has a soul, every animal, every living creature, every human. So if you harm it, then you're really harming yourself, because that soul and your soul are both connected, because you're all part of this universal soul of Brahma, this universal energy or spirit. So they take very strong cautions not to do any harm. So, for example, they're completely vegetarian. They only eat, fruits and vegetables and stuff. We could call them vegans if you want. And because they don't want to kill and eat an animal. They also don't farm, because they're afraid that if they farm, they're going to harm like worms or insects that live in the soil. So they don't do farming either. One of the more common things is also that they wear masks around their mouth and their nose, because they don't want to accidentally inhale or swallow a bug. And so this lifestyle is, it becomes popular in classical India. A lot of people loved it. And one of the reasons why is that it viewed people as equal. Since everyone is a small divine portion of the universal soul, then everyone, men and women, upper class or lower caste, or upper caste and lower caste in this case, they're all equal. So the Jainis, they reject the Hindu caste system. They say there is no, untouchables and Brahmins and everything else. Everyone's equal because everyone is equally part of the same universal God. So it becomes popular in India for a while. But the fact is that, as popular as it is not an easy religion to stay true to. All right, the Jainis, they starve because, again, they barely eat. They don't produce their own food because they don't farm. It is a very demanding lifestyle. So over time, people don't stick with it. And nowadays, Jainism is still practiced in India, mainly India, and it's a minor religion. Only 4 to 6 million people still practice it. Hinduism, in comparison, has like 300 million, 350 million people practicing it. Now, this idea of ahimsa, we see it again. This idea will pop up later on in world history when we talk about the 20th century. We're going to talk about this guy. He was one of the leaders of the independence movement in India. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. And he believed in this, what we call non-violent protests. And it is kind of like influenced from that ahimsa mentality of the Jainis, right? Where you protest against the government, against injustice, against unfair laws, but you never fight back. You don't do harm. And that same mentality, that same idea, the same way of thinking that Gandhi developed or used will be reused by Martin Luther King here in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. So even though Jainism, again, is not nearly as popular as it might have been once in world history, a lot of those values and ideas kind of still linger to this day, right into the 20th and 21st century. All right, next religion, Buddhism. So Buddhism is also an offshoot, an offspring, an extension of Hinduism. And the founder of Buddhism is this guy. He was a prince in India, in northern India. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. So about 2,500 years ago, he was born into this upper class, right, the warrior caste, the Kshatriya, and he lived in this awesome palace, and life was really good for him. He had everything he could ever want. He was educated, he was smart, he was married, he had a kid, and then one day he traveled around his lands, and he ran into people, and he saw that people were sick. He saw that people were injured. He saw that people were dead. And he says, what's the point of this? What's the point of living when all there is, pain and suffering and death? So he says, you know what? My life is like false. I've been living this false life. So he leaves everything behind. He leaves his palace, his family, his wife, his kids. And he goes on this journey of self-discovery. He goes to find the meaning of life. Try to understand, what's the point of it all? Because, if we're only on earth to suffer, then what's the point? There has to be a reason. All right, so he spends a few years living as an ascetic, and that means that you starve yourself. You deprive yourself of food and all material goods. You walk around, with just underwear, even if it's like freezing. You barely eat, like you only eat like one grain of rice per day. And the idea is that by depriving yourself of all the things that are material, you can focus only on the spiritual. And he does this for years. He starves himself. He's like a skeleton walking around, right? And this was like a popular thing for people to do. The Jainists were doing it all the time, right? By starving and depriving yourself of the physical world, you can focus on the spiritual. And Siddhartha says, you know what, this isn't working. I'm not understanding anything. I'm not getting answers. And then he decides, I'm just going to sit under a tree and just relax. And he sits there for days and days and days. And then, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, when he was not looking for it, he finally finds what he's been looking for. And that's what we call enlightenment. And this is where he would have been. Yeah, you can see the starvation taking its toll, right? That ascetic lifestyle. And like I said, he wasn't the only one. People all over India were doing this, trying to figure out the meaning of life, the purpose that we all have, right? And then Siddhartha says, I figured it out. And the people who were his followers, the people who he taught, they start saying, he is the enlightened one. And they called him the Buddha. So the Buddha was like this skinny, bony guy. He's not that chunky, bald guy that we see in, dollar stores that you buy him so you can rub his belly for good luck. That is not the Buddha. This is the Buddha, right? And so Siddhartha Gautama gets the title the Buddha. And he goes around teaching his path, his way, his lessons, right? And then he passes away because he's human. And then his followers take his lessons, they write them down, and they continue spreading it. Just like Confucius's followers, just like Lao Tzu's followers, just like Jesus's followers, right? We see a pattern here. And then we see the enlightened one, the Buddha, right? And of course, he has that halo of light indicating that he is indeed enlightened. And Buddhism becomes the fourth largest religion in the world, right? And even though it starts here in India, it will not remain very popular in India over time. It will spread. It will travel across the Silk Road, across the Indian Ocean trade networks, into China, into Japan, into Korea, into Central Asia, into Southeast Asia, right? So we see all these regions, all these places, they adopt Buddhism, but the home of Buddhism, which is India, it doesn't stay popular there. Right? It was popular for a while, but then it declines. So what do the Buddhists believe? Right? There's two main things. One is the Four Noble Truths. The other is the Eightfold Path. So, Four Noble Truths. Number one, life sucks and is full of suffering. That's the first truth. Life brings about suffering. Suffering is a result of attachment or of wanting things. So think of it like this. You're a little kid. You ask and you beg and you cry for your parents to give you a toy. Now, if you get that toy, you're going to love it, you're going to enjoy it, you're going to be happy. But over time, you're going to say, I don't like this toy anymore. I want another toy. You're going to be complaining and crying and bothering your parents until they buy you the next pretty toy. Or maybe your parents are strict and say, nope, no toy for you. Right? And that loss of that toy is depressing you. You're sad because how can you possibly live without this toy? All your friends have the toy. Why can't you have the toy? So we are attached to things. We are attached to people. Right? We go from one boyfriend to the next. We go from one girlfriend to the next. They break up with us. We're heartbroken. We're depressed. Right? We start painting our nails black. We are attached to people. We are attached to things. And that attachment eventually will lead to suffering, no matter what. Wanting things leads to suffering because either you get it or you don't, right? Get what you want. And even if you get what you want, eventually that will lead to suffering because either it'll disappear or go away, like a loved one who passes away, or you're going to stop wanting it. You're going to stop loving it. And just being around it might make you sad. So, how do you stop the suffering? Well, you stop wanting stuff. That easy. If you don't want to suffer in life, you stop wanting things. Sure, right? Easy thing. But thankfully, the Buddha tells us that there's a path. There's a way to do it. Here it is. It's called the Eightfold Path. It's also called the middle way. Because it's not this two extremes, right? Because remember, the Buddha's life, he had lived in extremes. At first, when he was young, he lived in this rich, awesome, materialistic world, right, where he was not happy in. And then he went to the other extreme, and he lived this, super impoverished, ascetic lifestyle where he was starving, and he didn't find happiness there either. And then he figured out there's a middle path, the Eightfold Path. And if you do these 8 things, the Buddha says, right, these are his teachings. If you do these 8 things, then you're living the right life. You're living a good life. And as long as you do those 8 things, you're good to go. So what are you going to lead? What is all of this leading up to? Well, it leads to nirvana. It leads to the escaping of this horrible, horrible system of reincarnation. Because to the Buddhist, reincarnation is not a good thing. Right? That once you die, your soul reincarnates back into life. That means you have failed to reach nirvana. You have failed to reach enlightenment. And that means that you're going to live another life where you have to fight against desire, right? Where you have to suffer. And the Buddha's message is that anyone can do this. Not just the upper class, like in Hinduism, where only the Brahmins can reach it. Anyone can live a good life, whether you're poor or rich, uppercased or lowercase, male or female. Anyone can reach nirvana by following the Eightfold Path, by following the middle way. And this means that this is a very popular religion, and it spreads. Right? It says there is no caste system. There is no upper class, lower class. Everyone is spiritually and socially equal. Monks, of course, are going to travel across India and China and Southeast Asia, spreading these teachings. Right? Women are going to support Buddhism because under the religious view, they're equal. right? Some women become even monks, or what we would say nuns, right? Giving them an option that other women might not have in other parts of the world, right? Similar to Christian women who become nuns, right? They choose a different lifestyle than otherwise would have been available to them. And of course, the poorest people want Buddhism as well, because in their eyes it gives them equality. So Buddhism is going to spread, like I mentioned, right, from its home in India to all parts of the world, right? China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Afghanistan. Remember Afghanistan, that is where the Gandhar Buddha was, right? Remember the Buddha statues that had the Greek style, right? The Greek dress, the Greek statue. That's here in Afghanistan. All right. The last religion, of course, the main religion of India, and even to this day it is the main religion, is Hinduism. So let's talk about this really quickly. So, Hinduism, one, it is a combination of Aryan and Dravidian religions, or religious beliefs. It is a combination, it's a mix, it's a synchronization. Right? And with the arrival of the Aryans into India, we see the birth of the Vedic religion. Right here we see the Aryans living in there. This is the old Indus Valley civilization. All right, so the Aryans come in and they start settling and they start building these kingdoms all over India. All right, and there we see the beginning of the caste system. All right, Hinduism is considered the oldest religion in the world that is still practiced to this day. It is the third largest religion, even though it's only primarily in India. So we see the cycle of reincarnation, right? Death, birth, and rebirth, and over and over and over. Hinduism is unique as a religion because there is no exact way of doing Hinduism or being a Hindu. There's literally thousands of gods. There's different ways of practicing. There's different methods of practicing. There's no one way, like, oh, go to church on Sunday type of thing. There's no one founder. There's no one book. There's dozens of books. And every Hindu follows the religion their own way. But the main ideas are the same, right? Karma, Dharma, reincarnation, right? So, Dharma. Everyone has rules that they got to follow, right? So if you're upper class, you have the rules of the upper class. If you're lower class, you have the rules of the lower class, right? And if you follow those rules, you build up points in your karma, right? If you follow the rules of Dharma, you build up the points in your karma, and that when you reincarnate, you can move up in society, right? Move up to the upper caste, right? And eventually, if you do this enough times, you reincarnate enough and you continue building up your karma, eventually you will achieve moksha, which is similar to nirvana. And if you achieve moksha, that means your soul escapes the cycle of reincarnation. You go and reunite with the Brahma, right, that universal soul, and you are in this eternal, timeless peace and tranquility forever and ever and ever. There's two major books that we need to mention. These are epics, right? One is called the Ramayana, one is the Mahabharata, and basically these are poems, kind of like Homer's Iliad and Homer's Odyssey. Right? Those are the famous Greek epic poems. Well, the Hindus have their own epics, and there's heroes, there's romance, there's adventure, but they also tell us, right, what the role of women is. So the hero will go off on these adventures and get punished, and the wife is supposed to follow along and be supportive of her husband, because that's her job, that's her dharma. And if she doesn't do that, she'll probably reincarnate as a lower caste person next time. Right, so here we see some images of those epics, right? You see these warriors on horseback, right? And these are the heroes of the Hindu religion, right, or the Hindus. So here we see two famous heroes of the Ramayana. There's this guy called Ram, and he goes on these adventures. That's Ram right there in that blue. His wife is Sita, this lady here, right? So he goes on adventures, and she's supposed to sit around and wait for him and support him and love him and be faithful and loyal, and be a good wife, basically. So the epics not only teach us, taught them stories, but also taught morals and expectations and everything else. All right, so that's the quick recap of Hinduism. Remember, reincarnation is a thing. You can move up if you do good in your life. If you do bad, you get punished and you go down. And eventually, if you rise up high enough, you become a priest or a Brahmin. And of course, only the men could become Brahmins because women are not spiritually equal. And therefore, they can achieve moksha and release from the cycle of reincarnation. All right, so that's it for this section. Part number 5. See you next time for part 6.